She showed up to the same house for 7 years. One morning, the door didn't open. No call. No warning. Just silence. What happened next changed her life forever. She had been cleaning other people's houses for most of her life. Quietly, honestly, without complaints. Every morning before sunrise, she tied her worn-out shoes, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and stepped out into the cold. Her name was Maria, and for years, she had lived by one simple rule. Work hard, stay invisible, and don't expect anything in return. Maria cleaned floors that were never hers. She washed dishes she never ate from. She folded clothes that smelled of expensive perfume. Knowing she would go home to a small apartment with empty rooms and cheap soap, still she smiled. Not because life was easy, but because hope was the only thing she could afford to carry with her. One house, in particular, had been part of her routine for nearly 7 years. Same white door. Same quiet neighborhood. Same instructions taped to the fridge. She knew which window stuck in winter and which floorboard creaked near the stairs. The family rarely spoke to her, but they paid on time, and that was enough. Maria never asked questions. She never crossed boundaries. She just cleaned. That morning felt no different. The air was cold, and her breath formed small clouds as she walked up the familiar driveway. She adjusted the strap of her cleaning bag and rang the doorbell, just like she always did. No answer. She waited. Rang again. Still nothing. Maria checked the time. She was never late. Being late meant losing trust, and losing trust meant losing work. She knocked softly, then a little harder. The house was silent. No footsteps. No voices. No sound from inside. She stood there, confused. Maybe they were running late. Maybe they forgot. She waited. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Maria shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to keep warm. The wind slipped through her coat, and her fingers began to ache. She looked around, suddenly feeling out of place in a neighborhood she had walked through hundreds of times. For the first time, she felt visible and unwanted. She knocked again. Nothing. Her phone buzzed. A message from her landlord. Rent due tomorrow. Maria swallowed hard. She tried calling the number she had saved years ago. Straight to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. She never did. She didn't want to seem desperate. She told herself to wait a little longer. As she stood there, memories flooded her mind. The years she spent scrubbing bathrooms while her back screamed in pain. The holidays she worked because someone else needed their house spotless for guests. The days she skipped meals so her daughter could eat. She had never asked for favors. Never asked for sympathy. She had only shown up. Another knock. Still no answer. The cold crept deeper into her bones. But it wasn't the cold that hurt the most. It was the realization that after all these years, she could disappear without explanation. No goodbye. No warning. Just a closed door. Maria slowly sat down on the front step. Her legs felt weak. She pulled her scarf tighter and stared at the door, as if it might suddenly open if she believed hard enough. She whispered to herself, "Please." She wasn't sure who she was talking to anymore. After a while, a car passed by. Then another. No one stopped. No one noticed the woman sitting quietly on the steps with a cleaning bag at her feet and tired eyes full of questions. Just when she was about to stand up and leave, the door across the street opened. An elderly woman stepped outside, holding a mug of coffee. She paused when she saw Maria. "Are you okay?" the woman asked. Maria hesitated. Pride fought with honesty. Then her voice broke. "I work here," she said softly. "I clean the house. I've been waiting." The woman looked at the closed door, then back at Maria. She walked over slowly. "They moved out last night," she said. "Didn't you know?" Maria felt the words hit her like ice. Moved out. No call. No message. No explanation. 7 years. Gone. "I'm sorry," the woman added gently. "I thought you knew." Maria nodded, though her chest felt tight. She picked up her bag with shaking hands. "Thank you," she whispered. As she walked away, the street felt longer than it ever had. Each step carried the weight of uncertainty. She didn't know how she would pay rent. She didn't know how she would explain this to her daughter. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she kept walking. Later that evening, Maria sat at her small kitchen table, staring at her hands. Hands that had cleaned countless homes. Hands that had built a life for her child from almost nothing. Hands that were now empty. There was a knock at the door. She froze. No one ever came unannounced. She stood slowly and opened the door. It was the elderly woman from across the street. She held an envelope. "I asked around," she said. "Some neighbors are looking for help. And this was left in my mailbox by mistake." Maria opened the envelope. Inside was a check. And a note. It read, "For everything you did. I'm sorry we didn't say goodbye." Tears filled Maria's eyes. It wasn't just the money. It was the acknowledgement. The simple act of being seen. That night, Maria realized something she had forgotten over the years. Dignity does not come from the work you do, but from the strength you carry while doing it. And even when doors close without warning, kindness can still find its way through unexpected places. Sometimes the door doesn't open, but that doesn't mean your worth disappears with it. It simply means another path is waiting to be found. Maria closed the door slowly and leaned against it, holding the envelope close to her chest. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that made thoughts louder. She sat down at the small table again, unfolded the note once more, and read it carefully, as if the words might disappear. For years, she had worked in silence, believing that being unnoticed was part of survival. That small note proved she had been wrong. Someone had noticed. Someone had remembered. The next morning, Maria woke up earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen, but she was already dressed, her cleaning bag resting by the door. She didn't know where she was going yet, but staying still felt worse than uncertainty. She stepped outside, the cold air filling her lungs, and began walking. Each step felt heavy, but it also felt honest. This time, she wasn't walking toward a familiar house. She was walking forward without a map. She stopped at a small cafe and ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu. As she sat near the window, she watched people rush past, each carrying their own worries, their own invisible stories. For the first time in a long while, Maria didn't feel alone in her struggle. She realized that many lives were built quietly, behind the scenes, without applause. Her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. A woman's voice greeted her warmly. The elderly neighbor had shared Maria's number with someone who needed help cleaning an office space twice a week. It wasn't much, but it was something. Maria thanked her and wrote down the address, her hands steady despite the uncertainty. That afternoon, she told her daughter everything. Not just about the lost job, but about the years of silence, the waiting, the closed door. Her daughter listened without interrupting, then hugged her tightly. "You didn't fail," she said. "You worked. That matters." Those words stayed with Maria long after the hug ended. Days passed, then weeks. Maria picked up small jobs here and there. Some paid less. Some were temporary. But each time she showed up, she carried something new with her. She no longer felt invisible. She made eye contact. She spoke when spoken to. She asked questions when something was unclear. The world hadn't suddenly become kinder, but she had become stronger. One afternoon, while cleaning the office space, Maria noticed a framed quote on the wall. It read, "The work that no one sees often matters the most." She stood there for a long moment, mop in hand, letting the words sink in. Felt like a message meant just for her. Months later, Maria received a call from a woman who owned several rental properties. She needed someone reliable, someone consistent, someone she could trust. Maria agreed to meet. During the conversation, instead of staying silent, she spoke about her experience, her years of work, her reliability. The woman listened carefully and nodded. By the end of the meeting, Maria had more work than she expected. Stable work. The first morning she returned to a steady routine. Maria paused before leaving her apartment. She looked around at the small space she called home. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't big. But it was hers. Built by hands that never gave up, even when doors closed without explanation. As she walked down the street, She passed a house with a white door that reminded her of the one that never opened. This time, the memory didn't hurt as much. It felt distant, like a chapter that had taught its lesson and quietly ended. Maria understood something now that she hadn't before. Being dependable does not mean being disposable. Being quiet does not mean being unimportant. And losing something does not always mean falling behind. Sometimes it means being redirected. That evening, she returned home tired but calm. She made dinner, shared stories with her daughter, and laughed in a way that felt lighter than before. The fear that once sat heavy in her chest had loosened its grip. It hadn't disappeared, but it no longer controlled her. Before going to bed, Maria placed the note back into the envelope and tucked it into a drawer. Not as a reminder of loss, but as proof. Proof that her work had mattered. Proof that she had mattered. The world would continue to close doors without warning. People would still forget to say goodbye. But Maria knew now that her worth was not tied to any one door, any one job, or any one house. Her worth lived in her resilience, her honesty, and her refusal to disappear. And somewhere out there, another door would open. Not because she begged, not because she waited, but because she kept showing up, even when no one was watching.